Welcome into Sports Talk with John Barron. Sports fans, you know what time it is. This week we're doing something a little bit different since the SEC Championship is just 2 days away. We thought we'd sit down and talk a little bit more about the Georgia Bulldogs and the LSU Tigers.
And obviously both teams are going into Mercedes-Benz Stadium with hopes and dreams of claiming the SEC title. And obviously only one will walk away victorious and punch their ticket to the college football playoffs.
Absolutely. Hopefully it'll be the Georgia Bulldogs, but we know one guy who wants that to be the LSU Tigers. Now, as we get things rolling today, let's see how both these squads made it here this season. Let's start things off with LSU. For the Tigers, they've had a tough schedule all year, but their first 5 games were kind of weak games, except for the time that they played against Texas, but that was just at the time. Now, not really what they needed to do, but they never really saw a struggle, and then they ran into Florida. And the Tigers and Gators traded shots all game, but in the end, the Tigers offense prevailed, and the Tigers walked away with the win. 2 games later, they ran into yet another problem. The Tigers had a showdown with Auburn. They came down to the wire. LSU was lucky enough to escape with a 23-20 victory that night, but the big one came on September 9th. The Tigers took down the Crimson Tide, and after that, LSU had trade places with Ohio State for the #1 spot. Now the Tigers haven't had an undefeated season since 2011, and a big key for the Dogs is going to have to be their defense, because the Tigers are holding an average of 48 points per game.
Of course, the Tigers, there aren't a lot of Tiger fans here in South Georgia, but there definitely is a lot of Georgia fans here in South Georgia. So let's take a look at what they've done so far this season. And for Georgia, it didn't take long for them to play their big game against Notre Dame that happened around week 4. And then they got their first loss of the season against South Carolina. And many people didn't know how they would respond, but the Dogs, they kept on fighting, and then they went down to Jacksonville, where Georgia knocked off Florida, then Auburn, and then fought their way back to the top 4. And as you said, John, LSU has a strong offense that scores a lot of points, and while they're going to have to put Georgia's going to be put to the test when they play against the Tigers, and this Georgia defense is only averaging 10 points per game, and that's something Kirby Smart spoke about this week, that his defense is going to have to step up and lead this team against LSU.
I don't know that the adage defense wins championships stands as much as it used to. When you saw scores from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and you saw scores of games, it was indicative of defense compared to now. Now it's like I got to play pretty good defense. I got to score a lot of points. I can't play horrific defense. I can't play bad defense, but I might not have to be perfect. Is the way a lot of teams have had success, and they probably take more chances and risk, and they just score tons of points. That's not. I'm not talking about LSU. I'm just talking about college football, because I think LSU plays really good defense, and they are explosive on offense. But you know, an explosive offense allows you to play a certain way on defense too, because you know that you're going to score a certain amount of points.
Well, let's talk about how Georgia stacks up against LSU. There's history between the two, of course, but it's never good history when you're talking about rivals. The first meeting was in 1935. LSU holds a 17 out of the 31 meetings, and LSU won the most recent meeting last year with a 36-16 victory. 3 of those last 8 meetings have been right there in Atlanta for the SEC Championship. Well, all the stats and statistics in the world may look good on paper, but until you take the field, all those mean nothing. Georgia has really made it very clear to reclaim the SEC title, especially after falling to Alabama last year. But head coach Kirby Smart and his Dogs are looking for a change as they try to regain and reclaim their status as the best team in the SEC. But head coach Kirby Smart says that he's going to use this game as a way to measure his players.
I mean, I probably did until about yesterday afternoon. I started watching the tape, and then you realize that there really aren't weaknesses. I mean, arguably one of the best backs in the country. I mean, just vicious, attack you, spin you, hit you. In the biggest games, Clyde Edwards has been one of the biggest players. Joe Burrow speaks for herself. I mean, I could go on and on. Wide outs, tight end. They got 5 really returning starters on their offensive line. They got defensive players. I mean, they got an outstanding all-around team. It's a tremendous opportunity to measure where you are as a team when you get an opportunity to play a team like this that is firing on all cylinders.
Well, that brings us to our next point. What happens when LSU or Georgia wins the SEC title, and what happens with the playoff chances? Now, you and I obviously have talked about the things that we've been really talking about have to be what's going to happen? Now, obviously, Georgia's been looking for a way to get back into the college playoffs ever since 2017. They won the SEC title. They won the Rose Bowl against Oklahoma, and they found themselves right there inside the national championship to try to win it against Alabama. Just did not happen for them. And then the next year, SEC title time comes, they play against Alabama, and they fall in the SEC title. And unfortunately, like you saw, the committee chose to not have them in that Final Four, and so they ended up not being able to play in the playoffs. So what's going to happen? Do you think there could be a possibility that that's what happens once again if they don't win? Now, many Georgia fans right now are telling us it's not going to be a problem because we're going to solidify a win and maybe even go up a little bit more, have a little bit of an easier first game, maybe take the number 2 or 3 spot after knocking off LSU. But you never know what happens. You never know. And
like you said, if Georgia does lose, I mean, do you still see them in the top 4? I feel like
there's a lot of good teams waiting for them.
Yes.
Utah, I'm a little shaky about.
Me
Utah
too.
at number 5. I don't think they'll be able to find them, their way into the top 4. But Georgia has solidified. They've beaten some big-time teams, but they've also had some struggles. You play against LSU, who went on to win, I believe, 50-13 against Texas A&M. That's the same Texas A&M team that Georgia had a struggle against, 19-13. And some of those teams they've been struggling with all year. South Carolina, of course, Kentucky, another one. But you never know. The big-time teams always show up on the big-time games.
And I think it'll be a perfect matchup with LSU's offense and Georgia's defense. I think that'll be, great matchups on both sides. And then you obviously have Jake Fromm on the offense going against a little bit of a weaker LSU defense. So I think either way you come out of it, they're both going to drop a few spots no matter who loses. And I think if LSU wins, they have to be number 1. I mean, their strength of record right now, I think it's top or number 1 in the country. And then for Georgia, if they win, I mean, talk about the turnaround they had after losing to South Carolina. I mean, I just think they'll be unstoppable if Georgia can pull out this win for sure.
Yeah, and there's somebody back there probably yelling, "No, LSU all the way." Our very own producer, Tanner Anderson.
Yeah.
He's all LSU, and you guys will see him here soon. We're going to have something very
trivia.
special later on for you guys in Sports Talk when we have a little bit of our trivia. But let's talk a little bit more about what's going to happen with these South Georgia ties. South Georgia has a lot of them on both LSU and Georgia in these college teams, and Georgia and LSU have a couple of their very own. Well, we'll start with Georgia. As everyone knows, our very own Kirby Smart is homegrown right here in South Georgia. The Bainbridge man has been doing his thing for the Dogs, but he's not alone. Just up the street from WAOB, Otis Reese, the sophomore defensive back, came out of Lee County, and a pair that came over from Cairo is Kobe Pierce, and the junior offensive lineman came from Cairo. Right next to him is his former teammate, junior outside linebacker Walter Grant. And last time, and certainly not least, the senior defensive lineman from America's Sumter, Tyler Clark. Now, if you're a Georgia fan or just a South Georgia fan, Clark is someone you've been watching throughout his entire time at Georgia. In his time with the Dogs, he's had 117 tackles. That's both solo and assists, and he's had 6.5 sacks. He's been the leader for this defensive line, and he's probably going to be looked to heavily in the SEC championship. And with several South Georgia teams trying to get out there, with several South Georgia players trying to be better. Of course, Lee County players taking the field Saturday. Their former head coach, Dean Fabrizio, tells us he isn't torn on who he'll cheer for this Saturday.
Right.
Well, we've had that situation several times this year, and, we certainly root for both of them. We root for Otis there.
Well, sorry about that. We couldn't really hear him, but he was just talking about how proud he is to have, his former players playing in this SEC championship game, and he just has so much fun watching them, and he's so excited to see how far they've come and all the success they'll have. So anyway, but with LSU, they don't really move a lot outside of the state, but nevertheless, the Tigers have a couple South Georgia players as well that are sure to make a big splash in the future. First, it's the Colquitt County boy, Jay Ward, only a freshman, but is excited to help with the defense. And as a couple years then, once again, Lee County sees another former Trojan making their SEC championship debut as a junior fullback. Torrey Carter will be stepping into Mercedes-Benz Stadium with a chance to raise the trophy at the end.
Yeah, obviously a lot of South Georgia players looking to, are going to be watching this game, of course, but a couple of them are going to be taking the field at Mercedes-Benz, sure, wide-eyed and eager as they can be, to be out there, just to be taking part in such a tradition, really, in South Georgia, just to be able to see the SEC championship, such a, it means more is what it means over there in the SEC, to see it in Atlanta, see it in Mercedes-Benz, but You never know what's going to happen. I'll tell you what's going to mean more. Who's going to win this trivia? We've got our very own Tanner Anderson and Grayson Passmore, the Georgia graduate and LSU fan, going head-to-head in a special trivia. We'll see exactly what happens. None of them have the answers. I'll make that very clear. So everything that goes right here, it's all fair and love and war. So when we come back, we'll have a very special trivia for you guys, so don't go anywhere.